It's a great meta for Chaser with picks like Graves, Nidalee, and Kindred being a very high priority.
See the bans come through. Trundle starts things off, which makes sense. I was surprised to see Trundle fall through picks and bans a couple of times yesterday. That ability to just take away flat armor and flat magic resist, specifically the flat armor, that moving Last Whisper that he can sometimes turn into between the Last Whisper and the Trundle pillar, makes him very powerful.
It does. So bans coming through quickly. Lissandra and Ryze. Trace, of course, playing a lot of Lissandra and solo queue as well, and generally just a very strong pick. Kuzan also, in one of his games where he took over from GBM last year, had a very powerful Lissandra even when it was off meta, so a good flex pick for sure for Jin Air. And that is not going to be allowed, at least in game number 1, by Longzhu. Lots of thought here in the last ban of this series. Of course, we are on 524, so it will be the Gangplank. That leaves MF up, however. And that may be the first pick. We saw this from SK Telecom yesterday, just first picking Misfortune on the blue side.
Misfortune, the thing you think about is, okay, she puts out a lot of damage, specifically her laning trades are very powerful, but she controls a lot of space. That's why when I was watching at home, just watching the space control of the ultimate, you can have a hyper carry, just, you know, sitting like a hyper carry mid laner, just sitting in the middle of the friendly bullet time and putting out damage, and no one can ever come and close the distance, just because you have to respect the zones of both the Make It Rain and the bullet time.
Yeah, very true, and before she gets some of those nerfs that come through in 6-1, she is going to be that high priority selection, but without the Trundle, we'll have a little bit less zone control than we saw when SK Telecom ran it, and the Lulu gets through, and Lulu Alistar are providing a lot of tankiness for Jin Air early.
Alistar's also one of the few champions that can put on that ultimate and then just interrupt bullet time. He is unique as a champion with all his damage reduction on his ultimate to act as an interrupter. Just looking at the champions that have made it through this draft, a third round of Tahm Kench. Now, Tahm Kench top was actually played to an excellent degree by Duke yesterday, so no guarantee it's a support pick. But there is that flex pick nature of Tahm Kench, at least on the current patch.
From what I've seen so far, Tahm Kench is not really a champion that's going to be picked as a support at these days. It's almost exclusively played in the top lane. He's so tanky, he's so brutal. And Mundo would be a throwback for Trace, a champion we thought we'd see a lot more at the start of this season, but consistently fell through picks and bans despite his very big power as a major tank and the power of these tanks in general.
And the Tristana that's being mulled over, it's not one of those spellcasting ADs, of course does have a decent spell rotation in lane, but with Lulu picked up, maybe you're a bit more flexible to go more for those auto-attack AD carries, just because you know you're not going to have a super tank in Mundo to deal with. Of course, Tahm Kench is going to eat up a whole lot of damage, but your positioning can be a bit more aggressive when you have a Lulu to beef you up.
That's right. Well, no Corki yet in the mid lane. You have to assume that Longzhu is going to be going for another AD carry with this Tahm Kench pick, because you have the versatility in who you save in that particular scenario. So picking up a Graves in the jungle or a mid lane Corki here might be ideal for Longzhu.
Well, with Rek'Sai locked in, probably means the Graves is off the board, at least for this game. We were excited to see whether it was the Nidalee, whether it was the Graves, more of a carry style return to Chase's game. That's when he was looking his best. You know, with Jin Air's passive lanes, GBM and Trace last season, it was all about Chaser going off on a carry jungler, but not for game 1. You are confirming your suspicions. It looks like a support will be taken, and it could certainly be Poppy, who now is also developing into a flex pick.
And Poppy has been one of Pure's most played supports in solo queue, but that's not going to be it. It will be a Bard and a Lux blind pick in the mid lane. I did not expect to see Lux blind, but maybe they got the assumption it'll be that Lulu. So coming in, they revealed their hand early, and now Jin Air has some decisions to make about their jungler. You can still jungle Mundo though, so that's not a guarantee.
They have so much flex choice. They have Lulu as a flexible top mid laner. They've got Mundo who can flex into the jungle. They have so many options that picking Lux blind, I saw how hard it was for you to force those words out of your mouth the moments you were like, Lux blind picks, because that's something you never see.
And it may be a mistake right here when that Mundo still can be jungled at the present time. So it could still be the Lulu top, Mundo jungle, and then something else in the mid lane, which you'd think would be the way they would want to go, considering how this draft is shaken out. Very tricky draft from Jin Air. They disguise their choice as well.
A lot of strong lane matchups against Lux. That's why you can afford to take some semblance of an assassin, or just something more aggressive. It looks like LeBlanc will be the choice, another good choice. Now, this was the matchup that, of course, just yesterday was opted into by Fly, who opted into the Lux versus LeBlanc matchup with a last pick Lux. In this case, it's a very swingy matchup. It's a snowball matchup. Look for specifically Chaser to get the advantage, just because Chaser's going to have a lot easier time impacting mid lane than Dr. Mundo is.
Yeah, I'm very surprised to see the LeBlanc opt in after the trouble that Mickey had in that matchup just yesterday. And the fact that we've seen, I mean, you were talking earlier about Dade playing in China in that matchup, and it was intentionally selected.
Absolutely. Pawn, his counter pick against, of course, his old Samsung teammate in Dade was the Lux, and put the star points on, did a little bit of jumping around in the mid lane, some dancing after deaths. He was definitely being a bit cocky in the matchup, but he made it work, and now with the changes in the meta, feels like Lux is only a better selection against LeBlanc.
And a big part of that is the dominance of Thunderlord, because essentially you have a guaranteed Thunderlord proc if you hit your Q, because you Q auto passive proc, and then that means the Thunderlord's coming for the big trade.
So wait, burst champions burst harder is what you're telling me.
Shocking, I know.
Well, that's exactly which one's a good laning tool as well. That's this biggest strength as we're loading into our first game. Expression on a tank, that makes sense, but Tahm Kench top, we saw Duke really pull it off. Of course, double global's also available with the summoner spell and the ultimate.
And we do have a lot of long-range backline damage with the Lux Misfortune combo. Certainly be played out well by Longzhu in some of these team fights. Let's get into game one, Longzhu versus Jinair. All right, game one, and day number 2 here of Champions Korea. Spring, our first round robin, and Longzhu's much-awaited debut.
Isn't it fun, though, that the last time we saw what was then Incredible Miracle playing in Champion Summer, it was Frozen playing Lux. And now we start Champion Spring. It's a different Longzhu mid laner, but still playing Lux.
That's right, and we do have a bit of a mix-up. Yesterday, we saw the Lux starting with a Doran's Ring, this time Corrupting Potion, chosen by Coco, and Doran's Ring start from Kuzan, so a bit of a reversal. And we'll see how this matchup plays up in the second day that we've seen it, and it's been opted into both ways. So it looks like players having a bit different opinions on which is the more favorable side of this particular matchup.
Just how this particular two teams come together in the late game is super interesting, because you look down Longzhu's lineup, they're all about the sieging. They've got Lux and Misfortune who can put out zones under turrets, try to take those turrets down, potentially have Bard for disengage. You have Tahm Kench to stand at the front and distract. But in the late game, you're going to have Dr. Mundo potentially with multiple items running at you with the Whimsy to break up any sort of siege. So it feels like Jinair, look, they do have this weird early game power spike mid laner and late game power spike jungler, but if they can get Dr. Mundo time, it can be hard to siege against a Mundo that's never going to stop running in.
Yeah, definitely very difficult. They have good engage and they have great protection. A lot of the late game for Jinair will be built around Pilot, and we do have a called lane swap. We also have the Bard ultimate, which can set up a bullet time final spark combo if used properly, so keep your eyes out for Pure, and there's some nice early trade damage.
Pure on this Bard. Bard is one of the strongest champions with Thunderlords just because his auto attack and the meat nature procs it. So at level 1, if Bard walks up and auto attacks you, you're taking in the realm of 200 damage with just a Q and auto attack.
Yeah, very strong. We start to see that more and more. Definitely why Bard is considered one of the top tier supports at the present point in time. And this is a very big bully lane right now. The power of 524 Misfortune, you are taking a lot of damage from auto trades.
Double Thunderlords action in full display there. We don't have the keystones on the screen yet, but that's definitely what's been selected by both Misfortune and Bard.
And we have, looks like going to be a passive lane. Chaser looking for an early gank, going to get behind Trace early on, force a flash, and there's the knock-up, gets the eat. And that is Trace in the belly, and Trace is definitely dead. And they're trying to hand this one over to Expression. Not quite getting that last auto attack, and that means that Chaser is going to have to come in for the first blood, so playing forward, and Chaser with a nice gank in the lane swap situation.
One of the words around the scene was that the synergy between Expression and Chaser was actually better than expected. It might be one of the reasons why they've elected to start Expression in this particular game. Everyone was waiting for Flame. We might have to wait a little bit longer.
Well, again, it's all about that synergy for Longzhu. With so many high caliber players on their team, they have to find something that works for them and not drop too many games while they all get on the same page.
And that's the thing, with so many moving pieces, when your whole lineup has basically been wholesale changed, if you have something that's working in scrims, like for example Expression and Chaser on the same page, maybe you won't mature into this lineup later in the season, but go for the low-risk approach where you are afforded to, and then later in the season build that synergy in a scrim environment.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially when there are so many expectations on you. Sure, we have a lot of games here in Korea, and there is room for attempting to build that synergy in professional matches, but maybe you decide to do that against perhaps a less intimidating opponent than Jin Air. Not that Jin Air is expected to be a playoff caliber team, but perhaps you save that for EM Fire or some teams that look like more bottom of the table squads.
Absolutely, and honestly it's a great thing for the Longzhu fans, because IAM's always had a great and vocal fan base, and now suddenly they find themselves in this very weird scenario where they go from perennial low-tier team to expected to at minimum make playoffs this season.
See Trace here starting to get a big CS advantage, coming in with a range on that Lulu, so nice harassment.
It's 2 levels ahead.
Yeah.
Despite dying.
Yeah, very far ahead, so good zoning at the start of this game, and it's going to be tough for Tom Kench, and I'm actually a bit surprised. Trace is a player who very rarely dies in lane, known for his conservative playstyle, hugging the turret, sacrificing CS to avoid giving up kills and play very defensively. But instead gives up first blood, not too common from this particular player.
You can see that it was all about trying to create pressure in the bottom, and that's why he had that experience advantage, but gave in for it. And maybe that's, you know, one of his off-season tasks was to increase his lane pressure, because so consistently last season we saw players pick scaling matchups into Trace, knowing that he wouldn't be the sort of player to pressure you even if he was in a counter matchup where he had the advantage.
Yeah. So Coco there, falling back, just waiting for the wave to come to him. Chaser is going to find Wing, both level 5. He's going to run into Chaser right now, get a little bit of a knock-up, and Chaser with a nice drop right there deals a lot of damage to Wing and starts getting some counter-jungling done. Does proc his Raptor buff as he drops that ward, finds a pink ward in that brush, but effectively wastes the Raptor. Nice reflexes from Kuzan as he comes in and distorts upon seeing the binding. And Coco now sitting underneath his turret. We'll just clear that with an E.
Chaser just saunter around the mid lane. You know, the difficult matchups, especially in the early levels, going to struggle against Lulu's sweet harassment. As Che looks for a bit of engage, means that we expect a CS advantage, but the CS advantage has been completely taken away.
Yeah, Pilot doing some work here, retreating. And Che continuing to take that big Bard harassment in lane.
When it comes to laning matchups, Lulu advantage over Tom Kench, Misfortune advantage over Tristana. Right now, it's a line ball on both those lanes.
So Expression actually making a big comeback based on CS from that early disadvantage. Starting to make it work for him. Has hit level 6, and so many globals here from Longzhu. The Rek'Sai, and of course 2 coming through from the Tom Kench. So a lot of map mobility, and that means that Jin Air is going to have to play very cautiously in the late game when it comes to contesting some of these objectives.
Tough ask for such a new lineup to coordinate. Just think of the untapped potential of this Longzhu lineup when it comes to turret dives, with Tom Kench showing up, with the Bard ultimate disabling turrets. The skill ceiling of this team comp is immensely high, so for a new lineup to play this in their first ask in Champions, they're taking on a lot of risk and expectation just out of the gate.
Yeah. And similar itemization in our mid lane matchup to what we saw yesterday, just rushing through to the Frost Queen's claim. A very potent item, or it's going to receive some nerfs, looks like, in the next couple of patches. Not only 6-1, but further damage done to that. Thankfully, I'm a bit sick of it already. One day of competition, Bob, with you. I already don't like Frostweed's claim.
It's one of those items that really pushes certain strategies in and out of the meta, and it's not being adjusted to the point where it won't be used. Both the changes have been on the kind of more steady-handed approach, which is puzzling to me because Riot took so much time to remove vision from the game all the time.
Yeah, very true. And before she gets some of those nerfs that come through in 6-1, she is going to be that high priority selection. But without the Trundle, we'll have a little bit less zone control than we saw when SK Telecom ran it. And the Lulu gets through. And Lulu Alistar providing a lot of tankiness for Jin early.
Alice is also one of the few champions that can put on that ultimate and then just interrupt bullet time. He is unique as a champion with all his
solo queue as well, and generally just a very strong pick. Kuzan also in one of his games where he took over from GBM last year had a very powerful Lissandra even when it was off meta, so a good flex pick for sure for Jin. And that is not going to be allowed, at least in game number 1, by Longzhu. Lots of thought here in the last ban of this series. Of course, we are on 524, so it will be the Gangplank. That leaves MF up, however. And that may be the first pick. We saw this from SK Telecom yesterday, just first picking Misfortune on the blue side.
Misfortune, the thing you think about is, okay, she puts out a lot of damage, specifically her laning trades are very powerful, but she controls a lot of space. That's why when I was watching at home, just watching the space control of the ultimate, you can have a hyper carry, just, you know, sitting like a hyper carry mid laner, just sitting in the middle of the friendly bullet time and putting out damage, and no one can ever come and close the distance, just because you have to respect the zones of both the Make It Rain and the...
It's a great meta for Chaser, with picks like Graves, Nidalee, and Kindred being a very high priority.
See the bans come through. Trundle starts things off, which makes sense. I was surprised to see Trundle fall through picks and bans a couple of times yesterday. That ability to just take away flat armor and flat magic resist, specifically the flat armor, that moving Last Whisper that he can sometimes turn into between the Last Whisper and the Trundle pillar, makes him very powerful.
It does. So bans coming through quickly. Lissandra and Ryze. Trace, of course, playing a lot of Lissandra.
Damage reduction on his ultimate to act as an interrupter. Just looking at the champions that have made it through this draft, a third round of Tahm Kench. Now, Tahm Kench top was actually played to an excellent degree by Duke yesterday, so no guarantee it's a support pick. But there is that flex pick nature of Tahm Kench, at least on the current patch.
From what I've seen so far, Tahm Kench is not really a champion that's going to be picked as a support at these days. It's almost exclusively played in the top lane. He's so tanky, he's so